Hello and welcome to yet another special episode of the Offside Musings Podcast. My name is Oke Ndibe and I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of my co-host Emeka Onyagwa. In today's episode of the Offside Musings, we're going to talk about one of the most heinous crimes committed in the recent memory of Nigeria. This was on May 12, 2022, when a group of Muslim students set upon a young woman, Deborah Yakubu, beat her to a pulp and set her on fire. These Muslim students had accused Deborah, who was a Christian, of blaspheming against Muhammad. Well, as if the crime wasn't horrific enough, dozens of lawyers came out and indicated their willingness, in fact their enthusiasm, to represent the two suspects who were then picked up by the police. Well, as if that wasn't shocking enough, in recent weeks we've heard that the two suspects had walked because the police had failed to show up in court to move their prosecution along. So the magistrate who was presiding over the case said he had no choice but to set the suspects free. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about this, and we're going to be talking about different standards of justice and the horrific role that religion comes to play a lot in Nigeria's public life and in its judicial affairs. So you're welcome.
Yep. All right.
So, this actually, as you know, we did a podcast when this case first happened. And in recent weeks, you and I had actually been talking about revisiting that case to ask for updates. And so what a shock it was for me to learn that basically that the state, the prosecutors who should have mounted a vigorous, unrelenting prosecution of these criminals, these brigands who took a human life, that prosecution had deliberately sabotage the case by simply not showing up in court. I don't, for me, what it says above all is that it speaks to a state that lacks any legitimacy. When the state would take the side of criminals and of people who have committed criminality of the most heinous kind, then I think that the state has lost all legitimacy, quite honestly. I don't know what your take is, Emeka.
Yeah, I mean it's an expected development if you understand the way the Nigerian state functions as a whole, the Nigerian psyche, the Nigerian philosophy as a whole, north, south, east, west. I don't think it's domiciled in one religion. I don't even think it's domiciled in Nigeria, to be honest. But in this case, we're talking about Nigeria. So if you understand the way it functions in a way where first things first, when something like this happens, they end up like, all right, cool, it's happened. Let's put it on the carpet. Let's move on. In essence, a place like that is who can do the worst. Essentially, the worst in any situation, the worst you can do, the better for you. Because at the end of the day, people don't seek justice, and that's. Sometimes people might say people overseek justice or an eye for an eye kind of justice. Yes, but at least you have to be in the conversation first of having justice first things first. So That's the first thing you have with Nigerian psyche. That it's always, and it might be harder for people to understand, especially if you're in a Western environment or in most of the environments. There's a level of justice that people require, whether it's Arab environments, Western environments, where in some of those Arab environments is literally an eye for an eye kind of thing. But in the Nigerian context, it's just more of something happens. It's the person that does the worst is the one that gets away with it. The person that does the least or does it halfway is the person that gets the blame. All this is to say, when it comes to Nigeria, when something like that has happened, you are going to sadly and honestly find a lot of people blaming the victim. Even just searching for the news of what's happening in court, looking for coverage of that news is very difficult to find. That shows you that people are not even the Nigerian media, print, electronic, and other kinds of media, are not even invested in covering the story in any way, shape, or form. What does it take? News organizations, they just had a big awards show in Nigeria where all the news organizations covered it. Granted, it was in Lagos, and this is in Sokoto. So for those who don't know, Sokoto is north of Lagos. So it's about an hour. Typically, we fly an hour and maybe 10 minutes by flight, somewhere around there. Sometimes an hour and a half. By road, it could take you a whole day probably to get there. It doesn't take that much to go there. It's a lot cheaper to send the reporters there, to spend a week and cover what's happening, to ask questions, to put the camera in their faces. After all, when they have to, in terms of stories that'll get more eyeballs, like in the case of the Boko Haram and what's happening with the Hausa Fulani bandits of Zamfara, news organizations from outside of Nigeria easily do that. You could say they have more financial muscle, but I don't think the financial muscle is the biggest. That I think is the interest. If you can spend so much money on whatever awards that happened the other nights in Nigeria, you can spend so much money covering it where you have all these reporters, you could cover that. Because at the end of the day, if you believe in a national consciousness, if you believe in a certain level of humanity, you should want these stories to be out there. And it's you can hire freelancers, you can, even on the ground, you don't even have to send a reporter from Lagos or Abuja. You could invest in hiring, building an infrastructure of freelancers, putting out these stories, but we can't even find it.
Yeah.
And that all goes to that just speaks to the Nigerian psyche, the way it works. It's that it's happened. Oh, well, God wants it to happen. It's her fault. Or, these kind of things. It creates a certain level of cowardice. How to use the kind of cowardice that does not bode well for any state that wants to function, because there's no state that is going to function in any real capacity that can make do with that kind of cowardice in its people. But that's what we've been beaten into, and that's what you're going to have with this case. And reading through it and taking with the various scanty reports that are out there, reading through it, it's a situation where they can't even find the suspects. You had the first court hearing, they said they arrested 2 suspects, and the first court hearing, you had over 34 lawyers that were paid for and supported and crowd supported, and they would say it in probably the native Hausa language stuff. It would probably proceed with stuff like Baroba, and they would proceed to say what they want to say all day. And at the end of the day, they secured the bail for them. These suspects have walked, and that is the situation. In fact, the term charge and bail in Nigeria is one of those things that is used to describe a vast majority of practicing lawyers who practice on the law, because there's no real vibrant law in Nigeria, even to the point of maybe even the British. So you charge people, you get a bill, and they disappear. That's why they're called charge and bail lawyers. So there's a whole industry about these things. It's sad. And from what is being said, even the police didn't bother showing up. And you might say it's heartlessness, but it's also an acceptance of the reality too.
Yeah. So it seems to me that this, so on the one hand, I believe that any accused, however grave, however egregious their crime, deserves robust representation by counsel, by lawyers. So this is not a questioning of that principle. I believe firmly in that principle, that if you are accused by the state or by a fellow citizen of a crime or doing something wrong, that you deserve to have yourself represented properly by a lawyer. But this is simply not what we've seen, right? Within hours of this very callous killing of Deborah, you found dozens of lawyers, exclusively Muslim lawyers, line up and declare their desire to represent the accused, the perpetrators of this heinous crime. And so the impression that was given here was that these criminals had done something heroic. It's a dark mindset. I mean, and these lawyers may think that they are pious Muslims, but if you believe in the taking of life, there's no piety there. It's barbarism, it's savagery. There's nothing ennobling about it. So that's one. The other thing is that two can play that game. So if a bunch of Muslim kids are in the frenzy of religious zealotry, set upon a young woman and kill her and then incinerate her remains, it's conceivable that some other time there'll be an equally misguided group of young Christians who think that it is a kind of a holy act to set upon and kill a Muslim. Nobody comes out clean. Nobody. This sort of mindset does not serve society. So my shock is that you have a bunch of lawyers who are lining up, almost literally dropping everything else, to rush to court to represent people who have committed a crime that chills the spine. That lawyers who like to style themselves men of the learned profession would take pride, if you like, in upholding or in holding up alleged or suspected murderers as enviable, admirable, impressive citizens or denizens of Islam. That actually, it's almost as frightening for me as the very act itself. You know, that these people would basically hold up criminals as their role models. You know, people whose conduct they would want to associate themselves with, to associate their expertise as attorneys. And I think that I mean, ultimately in the end, nobody looks good at all. Not the suspects, not the attorneys who came out, dozens of them, to represent these suspects as if they were somehow heroes. Not the police and even not the judge. The judge should have insisted that the police show up in court to make a case. But I guess that in a situation where 34 lawyers are showing up to defend two murderers, two albeit alleged murderers, we have to say, out of bowing, if you like, to the convention. But in the face of such representation, perhaps the police were intimidated. Perhaps there was a sense of a subtle threat, or not so subtle threat, that if anybody went to prosecute these criminals, that they'll be held to pay. But if the Nigerian state cannot find a way to hold accountable murderers, then we might as well declare free for all and say that Nigeria is a law-free society. That is a society where the rule of might is a going principle, that if you can kill somebody, you just go ahead and kill them, and see where that leaves us as a nation and as a society. It's really is beyond shocking, really. I am trying to find a word for it, and the impunity, the savagery, the primitive impulse on display here is just unbelievable.
Well, I mean, it would just simply be great if there was coverage of these things. I think it would be great if, and again, there are people who do great journalistic work in Nigeria. There are people who talk about things. Essentially, even that's what we are trying to grow up here and create here in terms of talking about some of these things. There are a lot of people out there that do some great journalistic work out there, but there are so many things like this that should be there. I guess it's not on the top of the food chain, given the multitude and the mirage of problems that face Nigeria on everywhere, every second, every time, every place, I was watching a live stream the other day, and everybody says the same thing. I always ask people, say, who hasn't sent money here to somebody this month? I'm even more like, who hasn't sent money to somebody today or tomorrow? Everybody needs money. Everybody has a problem. Everybody has something to face. It's a strained society from top to bottom, and it keeps getting worse with the elections, irrespective of how people feel and all those kind of things. These are the kind of things that occupy people's mindsets from day to day. And sadly, we don't see the utility of having to face issues like this. How do we as a society, how do we as a people, how do we as people who claim to be under an umbrella called a nation, or well, not a nation, sorry, called a state, a country, Nigeria, how do people sit down and deal with these issues?
Looks like, that what's going on in this case is that the prosecutors didn't show up in court.
So that's what they wanted. That's what they wanted. They wanted the charge and bill too. So they're like, okay, we don't want to handle this case.
We don't want to charge these people. So because of the national and international exposure of that act, the killing of Deborah, I'm sure that they felt, well, we have to be seen to do something, and so they gathered these young men. I'm sure they must have done wink, wink. We're just going to bring you to court. We're not going to show up, so we know the outcome is determined. And so the point that you made earlier, I think needs to be stressed. The fact that this is also a failure, above all, of the media to stand up and speak up for civil liberties. We need to make the point, that Nigeria as a multi-ethnic multi-religious society, that of course we have to be sensitive to people's religious faiths and expressions, all of them, whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or even an atheist. You should have a place in the sun. We don't, and I hope that those who listen to us will be such people as would not go out of their way to mock or to disparage or to denigrate people's faith or lack of it. But on the other hand, we must stress that there is nothing that somebody says about your religious conviction that should become a debt, a capital offense, that should lead to the person's death. And that there should never be a case where the mob settles the question of punishment for any accused person. The more that such things happen, I think the more they speak to the internal implosion of the Nigerian state. It is because in some cases people believe that if you hand criminals over to the police, that the criminals end up getting away with it, maybe by bribing the police and so on. That sometimes citizens then organize themselves as mobs and then exact what they believe to be justice, which is usually a very plenary kind of sentence, death penalty. It is not up to us, in the sense that there's a certain unbelievable arrogance when people say somebody has insulted our God, so we have to kill this person. If your God wanted this person dead, your God will kill that person. And if your God, if you're saying that your God is incapable of killing this person, so you have to kill the person for your God, then in a sense, what you're saying is, my God is so weak that when my God wants somebody dead, it has to come to somebody as weak as you are as a human being to carry out the death penalty. So the way I look at it is, I'm a Christian, but if somebody comes out and starts saying, spewing all kinds of inane things about Christ, it won't make me happy. If I have the opportunity to engage this person, in a civil conversation, I'll do that. But I'll never feel called upon to kill this person. I wouldn't even wish the person dead, and so I think that religious leaders have a duty of, instructing their followers, their congregations and so on, that it is not their place to kill. I think that law enforcement has to make a case that they will prosecute those who kill in God's name, that politicians and political leaders ought to proclaim that there is a zero tolerance policy on the taking of life on account of a perceived theological slight and so on, and that the media should play their own role, in reporting this act and in holding politicians and religious leaders and lawyers and so on who condone these acts, holding them to account and so on. Unfortunately, Deborah is no longer here, and it's not just Deborah. You look at Boko Haram and look at all the people that Boko Haram has killed. Look at all the damage they have inflicted on innocent bystanders, on just the most vulnerable people in society, in the name of fighting against Western values and Western education. The whole business of constituting yourself into God's army without an official commission from God is something that should cease. It doesn't make sense at all. It doesn't.
Well, yeah. Well, that's for that, man. Hopefully we'll keep talking about it. But
so I know that it's been a very strained and difficult conversation to have, because it's painful. It's painful. I put myself in the position of the parents of this poor girl, Deborah. Your daughter goes to school, and then you don't even have her body to bury. You have this something charred and burnt, as if it's a rabbit that people are cooking over a fire. It's we need to see everybody involved here: the police, the judiciary, the politicians, the lawyers, and so on. They need to see that this doesn't place anybody in good light at all, and that ultimately they would not be happy with a society where this sort of thing happens, as a matter of course. So it's been a delight, even in the pain and displeasure of talking about a subject that has, really left us disconcerted. But we're happy to be engaged in this conversation with you, our listeners, and we hope that you're going to join us in another episode pretty soon. Have a brilliant rest of the week.
Yep. Have a brilliant week. All right.